All right, here we go. Talking AI. Could you check? I just want to make sure. Also, yeah, Matt, you
Yeah, I'm
can.
check.
Yeah, check it. Check the stream. You
I'm,
can see.
I'm looking. Is it under? It should be under live, right?
Yeah, it should be under live.
I see it.
Can you hear Matt? Matt, can you say stuff?
Yo yo yo. Hello everyone.
All right,
Oh,
you can hear Matt. Yay! It sounds really good.
Let me try to refresh.
I have a phone.
Dude, good job.
Okay.
That sounds good.
All right, nice.
Good job on
We
the
got our
Llama
setup.
Good job on the Llama 2 video.
Thank you. Yeah, did you check?
Yeah, I'm looking at your. It's a very steady upward growth. Very good, dude. But I can't find the current stream.
Yeah, the Llama 2 one's like kind of popping off a little. I posted on Hacker News, and like seems like a lot of people got value out of it. I'm happy about it.
Very nice.
Yeah, so this is a little different format for anyone just tuning in who's used to seeing me coding this past couple weeks. I'm gonna start doing some podcasts in between the code sessions. This is our first one. We're gonna be talking.
I'm getting a lot of lag.
You're getting some lag? Okay.
On the YouTube over here, it's frozen. I might from watching the.
Oh, for real? It's frozen.
Is that? Are you guys seeing it as frozen or is it moving?
Let me see if I can make it. Yeah, I don't know why it's frozen for you. Let me check and see what's up. Do you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you and everything. I'm just trying to use.
I see.
Trying to have a visual of you. Yeah.
Well, we may not be able to do that then for the real time. That's all right. The stream will go through all right though. Is it good? Is it okay?
It looks from my browser, it's super choppy, and I'm like it's like glitching.
Yeah.
But the audio is kind of artifacty. I don't know.
I can also maybe just like make it standard def. I don't know. Well, that's all right. We'll work through we'll work through some of the kinks here.
Definitely.
All right, man. And I'm gonna keep this chat open just in case anyone. Well, let's get to it. So yeah, so just a little background. Matt and I. This is Matthew Finch. He's a 20x machine learning engineer. I don't know if you want to give yourself an intro or.
Well, basically, what I can say is that I work for the world's largest private network. It's a financial company, and I primarily, I focus on machine learning, data science within our infrastructure, and I have been quote unquote a professional for going on 5-6 years now. But yeah, I think that sums it up for now.
Wow.
We can get more into stuff as we go on.
Has it been 5 years already? Wow.
It feels that way. I think so. Maybe 4 or 5 years, not 5 and 6. But yeah, we're
that's
getting
wild.
To that point.
Yeah. Well, when I met Matt, he was just like some Bushwick musician guy, and then we talked,
Yeah.
and then you were like, "Yeah, I'm gonna start like actually learning like data science and like moving over to that career." And I was like, "Wait, that's awesome! Like you're gonna pull that off?" And he did. He went to Flatiron and just started crushing it. So yeah, one of the most impressive machine learning engineers. Yep.
I appreciate that, but it's interesting because it was actually that conversation where there's a little cafe in Bushwick called Molasses. And yeah, as you said, Jared, like I was running venues, I was like a licensing manager, I was performing, I was booking shows, doing all the stuff that was great or whatever. Really, I liked a lot of that stuff, but there's, I remember I was talking with you at Molasses when I think we had first met, and I don't even know how we got into this conversation, but we were talking about like binary trees and how to navigate and traverse through them, especially in kind of a query method. And you and I were chatting, and you said something to me along the lines, well, how long have you been coding? Or what you said to me, like, you implied that I've been in the industry for a while, and I literally was like, I've never coded like a day in my life. I don't know. What are we even talking about? I just like what we're talking about. And then you were like, you actually told me, you said, hey, man, like, you should take this more seriously. I think you know what you're talking about. Type
Yeah.
thing. And I took that to heart. And then when I decided to actually jump ship into out of the music industry and into the machine learning data science industry, that it really does spawn a lot from that conversation.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, there's a lot of thanks to you there.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I immediately was just like, because like I've spoken to so many people in the process of like learning how to code and like getting better at software engineering and all that. Now meeting a lot of people in the machine learning pipeline and all that. And I feel like when talking to you, I could just immediately tell. I could tell when someone has like a intuitive understanding of not just math, but of all of problem solving, I guess, is a way I can abstract it. So, which is kind of the main. I have a whole video where I was talking about like the main reasons why people actually. I was speaking the negative. So the main reasons why people don't do well in like self learning, and one of the reasons why they don't like problem solving. Like straight up, it's a hard truth. But I can immediately tell. It's like this guy likes problem solving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that. So like. We've been talking. I mean, we talk like maybe more than any person about AI. Like we talk so much about AI that it's actually hilarious. And we just have like if someone cataloged all of our text messages, they'd be like, "Oh, these guys are like actually insane."
Yeah, if you take like some of our text like out of context and don't realize that we're talking about like ML systems,
yeah, people are like, "Oh my, what the hell?" Like this is so. Like let's start from. I have some notes here. So let's just to like before we get too into tech, let's talk the soft stuff like current state of AI. We can get into AI safety in a little bit because we talked a little bit about that, but we never uploaded that. So I want to get a little into that. Current state of AI. As someone this is like your profession, what's your thoughts on? I mean, there's a rapid, exponential growth curve happening right now. And what's just your current thoughts on what's happening, what has happened the past, even just 6 months? A year might be too much, and what's going to happen possibly. Yeah,
definitely. So, well, the first things I would say is that the biggest thing that I thought was kind of mind-blowing, and I think this is just part of the narrative now, but it's that the fact that transformers can perform the way they do, and that as you build systems out around them and start chaining prompts together, adding knowledge graphs, like inserting like vector DBs for like facts and stuff like that. It still blows me away the imitation of reason that comes out of it. That is, I can still convince myself that I'm talking to someone on the other side, even if I wrote the model from scratch, trained it on like a subpar data set. If I put it into the right mode, I can still convince myself that I'm talking to a person or something that has. So to me, that blows my mind that is a fact that's going on. But my general stance has not really changed, and that is that AI is a phenomenal tool, and that's what it is to me, though. And that's kind of where I don't really see it beyond that. It is an extension. It is a tool. It is a way of engaging with the world around me. It is a way of trying to represent aspects of the world. It's a way to generate probabilities that maybe would have taken me a long time by hand to like etch out all the variations of things.
Right.
So when I look at the state of AI, I think we're in this like golden age for people who want to explore it, develop it, who like there's such a nice pull and push right now between open source and closed source, like kind of corporate models, and these kind of like more open source foundational things that people want to pull down and build on top of. I think Llama 2 is ahead of the game in open source by far. I think OpenAI and Microsoft are ahead of the game when it comes to how they've marketed it and how they've created a personality and a brand around it. That's all very impressive to me. But my kind of short response after that little bit of context is I'm a little bummed out about what's happening with AI.
Yeah.
Because there was this cool moment where the world got introduced, and I think that moment actually happened with the Stable Diffusion, when all of a sudden we could do text to image like that. It was like everyone was super excited, and then it was like a few months later they were like, and now we have like chat abilities too, and then if you've been following, they have multimodal everything's now, depending on who you talk to and what you have access to. So what I would have liked to have seen was that enthusiasm, like kind of follow alongside.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm actually seeing happen is the industry is moving at such a breakneck speed. It's like forcing people to kind of like stay in their own lane and let the trailblazer go. And that feels divisive to me. And then on top of that, while that's happening, there's all this fear mongering coming from these corporate, like, except for, again, I don't see any fear mongering coming from Meta at all. Like, they're very kind of like, let's get everyone involved, let's do this. But other big companies, they're spending a lot of time in scaring people into thinking that this is like a nuclear like type weapon and not everyone should have it. And the fact that you're having that happen at the same time as this breakneck speed change in the industry, change in what resources are needed, change in what hardware is needed, that is all very discouraging to me, because again, I think AI is a tool, and it would really bum me out if everyone didn't get this tool. This is something that I really think everyone needs access to, and everyone should be able to utilize it. And that's my underlying feeling at the end of the day. So I'm excited, but I have a cautious eye as to how large forces are implementing it in society and what those repercussions mean. Yeah,
that's interesting. Yeah, instead of like even going into even consenting to the concept of AI safety the way it's been talked about, let's just talk about two things that we've talked about. Well, let's first talk about the fear that narrative, specifically coming from like OpenAI. But then I want to get into data literacy a little bit. I was talking about that a little bit because I don't know if you saw, I made a little web scraper to scrape Twitter yesterday and all that, and I was like talking about how sort of a little bit about, we had this idea about like making these like this kind of data pipelining suite, and I was talking about how specifically like the data fetching part of that, where you have these like semantic models where you can like select comments from page and all that, and different tools so I think we're right at an interesting point in the moment where we can go a lot of directions when it comes to all the engineering energy. And there's like a fork in the road, there's like a light in the dark. And I think that with all the energy, whenever you have like a ton of people training on new, really powerful ideas, it can get really sucked into corporate narratives that just like, extend the possibility or push off possibilities by decades simply because, everyone's trying to get like jobs that don't exist or jobs that aren't going to exist in 10 years. So it's a long way of saying, like, what do you sort of see? I have my own opinions about it, but how do you see these like fears kind of? Do you think that there's sort of a push into control when it comes to like controlling the narrative around AI, and do you think that's coming from anybody or if that's a thing?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely happening. It's hard for me to fully talk on people's motives. From the things I've seen in my life, the things I've read about in history books, and movements in the economy and how the people have responded to things like that, what I personally think is going on is, yes, I can. So I'll play devil's advocate for a moment. I can understand very easily that the amount of propaganda, misinformation, ability to lie on a global scale, the ability to push ideas at like light speed in an uncontrolled, unprecedented manner. Yes, all of that is true with AI. I know, and that is scary when you think about it.
100%.
We have to think about there's another thing we have to think about that. Like, I people don't seem to understand, dude, you don't even need AI to do things like that. You could just have like a text document with canned sentences, and you can unleash bots on the world.
100%.
So I'm actually not really worried that like someone like me who understands how systems works, I could even probably honestly buy like 10, 15 accounts to authenticate if I really wanted to. It wouldn't be that big of a deal, whether it be on Twitter or I could create fake accounts and I could operate in that fake space and then just use canned responses, or by just utilizing Google search, you could like cross-reference different hashtags and share links on different pages.
And just to, I don't want to interrupt too much, but just to sort of give some context towards it, you're sort of talking about how like there's this thread of like people making generative AI bots that are just like going into threads, right? Yeah, and just like being superhuman now that we have this new technology. Yeah,
exactly. And what I just don't think we have to worry about is I don't think that's going to be citizens doing that at the end of the day. Because, I mean, you've built language models, I've built language models, and we all know we've truly worked with them. They are difficult to maintain. It is not a simple task to have a, like, model up in the world for, like, concurrent use behind an endpoint. And, you know what I mean? Like, that's not going to happen. And if you have, like, this, like, small ecosystem, let's say you have, like, a nice little server with some great GPUs, and then you're like, let's say you're trying to do some like misinformation attack. It's like, in reality, the most effective way for misinformation at this point in the game is how it's already working. You have these bad actors buy up fake websites, astroturf a news story, like inorganically while it seems real to bubble it up, and then have pundits in varying spaces talk. So the orchestration of misinformation and the fear that we're being told about AI is actually already happening in just the media sector with no AI. So it's like the fact that no one cares we have cameras, the fact that no one cares that we make videos all day, that we create art, that we write words. I just don't buy that all of a sudden because there's AI, like we're all just gonna use it for evil. It's like, no. The only people that will probably use it for evil have the infrastructure. So if you have the infrastructure, I think the regulation should fall more on people who have the potential to do it versus your everyday person.
I will say, I agree. Well, one, just as a preface, I'm not for really most of, like 99% of tech regulation, just personally. Mostly for the reason that typically, the way lobbying works in America, the regulations that get created are typically top down from the richest companies. I'm not like a communist or anything. I'm not just anti-big companies, but the reality is if the only people that get to talk to Congress really directly about these things are the richest companies, then you're not going to have like a very egalitarian solution to the problem. But you're probably just going to get a bigger government, bigger regulations. But I will push back on one topic here. I do think that regulation aside, the hackers are going to hack, and
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
exactly.
That is what you're saying.
Because basically what I'm getting to is kind of like what I was kind of going down that line is that. To me, it's really funny that Elon Musk talks about the dangers of AI. He's like, these things are getting too smart. There's going to be a singularity, and we're all going to get sucked up into it.
Yeah, fear mongering.
These things are going to have like autonomous action systems. We're like, okay, so what are you doing about that? He's like, oh, I'm building autonomous robots, autonomous cars, something to put into your brain so that AI can like know your signals.
That's so true.
Like, okay, so you must not be that afraid of it.
You're
actively building towards it. It's like imagine if Oppenheimer was like building the bomb, but then doing like press conferences being like, guys, this is the worst idea. But me and my team, we're doing it all day, every day. Let's get it done. In fact, I'm gonna like buy up all the other like little bomb industries and have them like build my things for it. So I don't know. When you look
Dude,
at who's telling you, it's
yeah.
terrifying. None of them are stopping what they're doing. They're just trying to find ways to stop you from doing it too, which to me says it's probably not so much a danger as much as it's dangerous for there to be competition, because this is not a moat type thing. This is science. This is math. This is just how these things work. No one in my mind invented it in the same way that no one invented gravity. Maybe someone was the person to write it down, like maybe Geoffrey Hinton. Maybe we can look at like the MLP from 1950, the original multi-layered perceptron. We can look at those things and say, yeah, maybe those people quote unquote invented it, but in reality, they just described a process that's available to everybody. So I just don't buy the regulatory stuff.
Yeah, and also like you can do AI on a piece of paper, as you kind of alluded to earlier.
Yeah.
It's like I can, I can get dot product from two matrices. I can do gradient. It would take me a long time to write out gradient descent, but I could do that calculus. But so what's interesting though, you mentioned Oppenheimer. I find I'm all about collective consciousness. A little bit of a conspiracy theorist when it comes to things like this, but like I find it really fascinating that with all this AI accelerationism, we have a movie that's in the parallel of 80 years ago, in that same kind of like fear kind of a narrative happening, where you have someone who has powers. It appears that intellectually they gain powers. I'm not saying this is true. In fact, I would say this isn't true, but it appears like they've gained powers that's like godly through the intellectualism. And I find it really interesting that we see that happening now with AI, where there's this like individual people, men, that are making these things that might like change the fabric of society and all that. And then you have this movie come out that's like just about that same thing. I find that interesting, but not saying that that's like on purpose, but it just shows that like I think we're all kind of like thinking. I think people can kind of be in synchronous action, like they can behave synchronistically. And I think that right now tech is in a huge push towards massive automation, and the same way that in the 40s people were in a huge push towards big destructive devices, and but that was more so influenced by wartime stuff. But I think
Exactly.
We're in a weird time right now. I think when it comes to, I agree that like, well, yeah, I think the regulatory thing is just it's gonna be bad. It's gonna be bad for anyone, especially that's why I'm trying to make videos on web scraping. It's gonna be bad for anyone who's an independent, an indie developer who wants to get data.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they start, what you're seeing with Twitter, as soon as they start kind of putting the walls up, and then you get more and more walled gardens, you're gonna start seeing more people taking action to get data in their own hands, and you might have some situations like, I don't want to make it sad, but like that Aaron Swartz situation where you have like someone that pretty much like is all about freedom of access of information, and they get the boot on their neck. And I think we're going to start seeing that more, because maybe not to that extreme, but people are going to start really, we talked about this last night on the stream, but people are going to start really putting some guards on their data now. Data is super valuable right now. Real world data is like, it's like gold right now.
Absolutely. And I mean, and the thing is, it's like it's half of the chemical reaction, right? Like,
Yeah.
the data and the model. I used to try to decide, like, what's more important? Is it the data? Is the data what's really important? Then I'm like, well, no, it's got to be the model, because the model is the statistical engine that pulls the patterns out. But I realize it's the two together, married with like the trinity of compute, right? So it's like data, modeling, and compute. You need all three for this thing to happen.
Yeah.
It's not that one is more important than the other. However, one is more easily commoditized, which is compute. That's the first thing. That's super easy to commoditize. You just, think about AWS, think about Google Compute, think about these cloud services. Super easy to turn that into a dime, no problem.
Yeah.
Now, what I find fascinating, and this is the struggle, and I think they're gonna do it. And by they, I just mean, the forces that be. I don't know what, I'm not saying any specific individuals,
Hmm.
but it's going to be very interesting to watch the narrative of how do we justify, like, basically with the current state of the art models. There's many lawsuits from various people saying you've plagiarized me in some fashion.
Yeah.
So I'm more interested in how those play out before we actually see what ends up happening with the regulations, because I think the regulatory bodies are going to have to see what happens, because it's like, are we going to backtrack and say, hey, you're right, we did steal all this data, and since we want to make money, as in big companies or whatever, since we want to make money off this data in the future, will we take the hit and go back and say, hey, you were right, we should pay for this data, and create an example where they pay out, like a handful of creators, and then they say, the first 1,000 people who sign up for the petition will get their reparations of the data that we stole from you, and then we're just in this new game where it's like, now we've set the deal, it's all money now. We could go that route,
Yeah.
or they could do something where they're kind of grandfather. Okay, any of the data sets that already exist, whatever. But you,
Yeah.
that So I really want to see how they handle it.
So,
if they handle it in the latter form, then they're like kind of snakes and weasels. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I actually want to see them go back and say, no, you're right. Data is super valuable. We're going to pay out because we just scraped the internet with no one's consent. So let's just,
You know what's fascinating? So, what struck me in the beginning of your explanation there, what struck me really interesting is you separated with data modeling and compute, and this, so that's what's really, so the compute side is what's really fascinating me, and this is where, because I'm all about like the scheme, right? No, but like so compute, so within compute, so let me just ask, you're grouping together the mathematical work efforts, like the
workload,
like, but not just that, but the academic work into creating, attention is all we need, for instance. Like, would you like abstract that and put that into the work? Like, if for instance that maybe decrease to a certain X amount of possible compute resources over time. If we're going to graph out how much compute that commodities use over time, certain developments in academia might make it so compute is used less, perhaps. Does that make sense? Like making the models more efficient is really what I'm saying.
Well, yeah, I think they're. I mean, I think people are absolutely working on that.
So
I think that is
right.
100%.
So like
right now.
One thing I find interesting is what happens if some magic starts to, not magic, but like some just brilliance starts to come out, and the compute gets, in an accelerating way, gets decommoditized. Like what would, like, and what I mean by that is something's just so efficient and good at, like, the Llama 3 is just like better than GPT-4, and you can run it on a CPU. On like a shitty CPU. Like, what would happen then? Just like thinking of that idea.
I think a good analogy to that is we can think about how phone companies exist, how like the concept of like data when you're like texting. Do you remember back with flip phones? Like, I only had like 20 texts a month.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because it was expensive. It probably was a little bit of a ripoff too, but there was a resource constraint there.
Yeah.
And then, jump forward 25, 30 years, and it's like I'm sending like 20 text messages a minute to 80 different people. Not literally, but you know what I mean? Your phones can handle it. You have a computer in our hands. That's what these are. So I think it's possible. There's literally a CNN and an LSTM in your iPhone somewhere. I promise you. Doing something.
Yeah.
Like it's like I like the idea that like with the I don't know about Androids, but I know with iPhones they try to like scroll through your photo album and like group the photos that are around the same time together and have the same type of imagery or the same type of mood. And so that would have been in like 2009 that would have been like an academic like thesis where there was like funding behind it and like a company to study it. Now everyone just gets that for
Right.
free. The difference is, can you access the part of your phone that allows you to control that model?
Mm-hmm.
No, you can't. But it's there, and the
Interesting.
compute is there, and you can have it, but can you control it? So I think as the compute becomes easier and easier, we're going to start to see some efforts towards, and I think this is a good transition into literacy, you're going to see efforts to decrease literacy and increase mythology.
Yeah,
And
of
the more
course.
mythological we get about things, it doesn't matter how accessible it is, because some people are just in their mind going to be like, that's some alien voodoo magic,
Yeah.
and it's really important, but I'm not someone who can do that. But if you increase literacy and you decrease mythology, then basically what people will see is a tool that they can achieve their own desires with, and they'll be more prompted to engage with it. So I do think that the compute resource, and I'll wrap this response with this, but the compute resource is coming down the line, but there's going to be a lot of marketing around the expensiveness of resources. They will probably even, in my mind, use geopolitical things like issues between Taiwan and China to talk about chip prices, and all of these things will come into play. But I promise you, there are many, many brilliant minds in academia right now trying to figure out how to optimize a GPU in a way that like we have not seen before. I was recently at a
100%.
conference in Miami, and they were, I mean, the level of detail and control that they are starting to have over how to maximize every like frequency of energy inside that GPU, it's phenomenal. So we're going to have access down the road, but it's this game of, are you literate, or are you kind of viewing this as like a religion of some sort?
So the interesting thing with the analogy with phones is that Moore's law kind of like stopped a little, and when it comes to the CPU processing power, the things needed to make sure that the data is able to go over that you can keep higher bit rates, and that it can process it well, and the computers that route these things can process this data well, especially for video encoding. That reached a point. It's not so much that Moore's law was impossible to continue. It's just that the market was good. People were able to consume enough so that the companies could meet their ends that make the processing units, that they didn't need to keep competing at those to do that research to push that to the next level. What I find interesting with AI is I don't know the point at which that will happen, and I don't know if that's like tomorrow or like it'll never happen, or like I don't know if there's gonna be some sort of acceleration to, oh, actually, like Llama 3 is just everything we're ever gonna need. You know, like does that make sense? Like that's one thing I'm interested in right now.
I don't think that's gonna happen, because AI is a reflection of what humans are doing, and we're gonna keep doing things. And so there's gonna be new data, there's gonna be new scenarios. I think what's gonna happen is they will find a highly optimized, standard, and very fast way to go from like 0 to like foundational model. Like it's gonna work really fast, but I don't think everyone's gonna have access to that, because I mean if they wanted to play the game right, which I think Meta's doing, is you want to create open source foundation model factory that pumps out really reliable foundation models. And I mean they should come with like little like FDA like nutrients inside. You know what I mean? Like they should be like, this is Llama 2. It was trained between these years. It's referencing these cultural things. It's trained on these data sets. It has these biases. Here's here's the distribution of the data sets and how they mix together. So that's what you're dealing with. Now go and build something around it, or fine tune or do what you want. And then a year or two later, they should be like, all right, here's Llama 3. It's incorporating aspects of Llama 2, but here's all the new stuff that makes this a relevant model for you today. I think that will happen. But what I'm interested in is along that question is to what what level of usefulness is actually something people need,
Yeah.
and then what is going to be like the made up problems and the made up solutions so people can sell you AI. And that's what's going to get weird. And I think that's what's going to give us the feeling that we've gotten really far. They're kind of like, hey, your cup can tell you when it's full. You no longer have to look at the water in your cup. It's like, great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's going to feel like we're in this like saturated space, because I mean, that's how I feel about consumerism, like in general. Like I'll go into like a store in America, and I'm so desensitized to how fortunate it is to have all that stuff accessible, right? Like I'm just desensitized to it. In fact, I'm even led to believe sometimes that we don't have enough and that it's all failing. But I look around every store, and it maybe not the exact product that I want, but I'm just like, I can choose 20 of anything, you know? But I don't feel like the market's expanding. I have this feeling that it's slowed down, but I think it's because I'm highly saturated with it. So there would be a point when AI is not novel anymore, and we feel the saturation effect, and then that's where I think it's gonna feel like Moore's law is no longer expanding. You know, that's my vibe towards it, and I think that when we hit that, that means basically access has been available in some format that is acceptable, and then I think behind closed doors, you know, in these like no academic institution will ever have as much data as Google or Facebook.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, like
definitely.
They're just not. So those companies and a few others will be the leaders and the drivers of the innovation. And I think it's just about making sure they're always in the spotlight. And that even if you feel super saturated by it and you feel like, all right, we finally got to the point where I have an AI in my shoe to tell me when my foot's actually in my shoe. You know what I mean? Like when we get to that place, we still need to be like vigilant and be like, hey, but what are they doing though? Because let me put it this way. What we're doing as a culture is entertainment, essentially, with each other. So we're creating entertainment AI for one another in some format. But there's another part of society that's way more advanced in using AI, and that's military weapons systems. And so it's like, I don't ever want to be bored with AI, because the second I'm not paying attention, within like 6 months, they're going to go from like missiles that can identify faces from across the planet to like missiles that can like live inside your ears until they want to blow up. You know what I mean? Like, will never be used, you won't even see it coming. So like that is where I feel like we're going to experience that slowdown, but that's going to be the time to actually pay more attention, because that's when they're closing the door and letting you think, all right, we've achieved this summit, so we'll just stop working on it now and like back away. But they're going to be like, okay, now we're building the real systems. Now that entertainment AI is keeping everyone occupied with if a writer should be writing or the AI should be writing or whatever argument people want to have about it.
And I think one of the things that will, more into the data literacy side, one of the things that will get to the world that, because really like people every day that work jobs and have businesses, like everyday people, they're the ones that understand the problem spaces that need to be addressed when it comes to like building businesses, making products and services, that like getting an economy going where you have enterprises starting that actually address problems. It's the people that work every day. It's not really like a top-down thing. This whole like think tank thing where you have like people that are detached, like organizing stuff, like farming people and all that. That's like all BS. Like that's not actually the real way people actually solve these problems. Is, oh, like I know because I worked in, I don't know, manufacturing for 10 years, I know like 10 different businesses that can be created, and then possibly these things could all use AI, and all these things could make companies a ton of money, you know, or make people a ton of money. And that, I think that translation is super hard, because I've worked at so many startups since I was like a teenager. Like I've just worked at like startup to startup, and one thing and partially because I wanted to learn about how things worked in that world. And one thing that the tech startup world misses is that translation of like, yeah, you can't actually solve problems unless you've really experienced something. And I think right now, I'm seeing a lot of the acceleration in AI in that like think tank startup-y world, kind of top down, like building a lot of like, that's the whole like AGI thing is like, it's the real wet dream of that for an engineer is that these tech startup engineers can finally build something that is so amazing that it doesn't actually have to address any specific user concern. Like
Yeah.
it's
No,
so
it's
amazing
yeah.
that they actually like they can truly just be the like they could just be all in their ego and then like fully and then be validated because it actually still solves problems somehow. For me, that's not
Yeah.
even real. That's a fantasy. Like that's not like, you know.
The way I think about this with those whole large models, because I agree with you completely. I actually in within my company does have like a GPT branded model that we use internally, and there is something interesting about it. But even our big GPT model is still a domain specific model within our
Yeah.
industry. We're not trying to read the whole internet.
Yeah,
We're
yeah,
trying to
yeah.
read everything that's related to the industry that we're in so we can solve problems in that industry. I like to think of it like this. If you're going to tell like a high schooler to do a book report, you don't say, all right, go and read every book,
Yeah, yeah.
and then after you read every book, read the book I want you to tell me about, and then answer the question.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, no.
It's
It's
so
like
bad.
you
It's
just read
so
the book.
bad.
Okay, and some people might make the argument, yeah, but your whole life you've been training.
Well,
So I
real
can see
quick
that
though,
you have X amount of years to
yeah,
take in data or whatever. But the point is
yeah,
kind of like these large generalizations of things. Like the devil is in the details, like always. So I don't want a more general model. I actually want hyper specific models that have like the fluency of the grammar of a large model. Like the grammar is what I'm interested in foundation models. Their ability to like understand like certain word connections that is better than smaller models. I am hyper impressed with that. But I am way more impressed with like the information retrieval of like
yeah.
a small semantic vector DB than I am like a blown out model.
So,
You know what
but
I mean? Like those are so much more useful.
to play devil's advocate, the argument with the book analogy would be that it's not that they'd have like if they read enough books, they won't even have to read The Great Gatsby to answer the question. That's the idea sort of I see with like AGI is that with enough of this if it's all in the same language, with enough knowledge, you don't actually have to learn any. You don't have to. The new knowledge is already built into your the the way the brain works already.
Yeah, but I don't know, man, because I understand the
Yeah,
idea
I don't
here,
agree with
but
that. That's just the devil's advocate for it.
no, right, exactly.
Yeah,
Because the whole idea, right, is that you create such a robust training set that it does. Yeah, like you say, it doesn't even have to read The Great Gatsby to like inference on.
right.
Like that's the whole idea that whole book could be its own like kind of new data set. So I don't know though. To me, it just I haven't seen it yet. What I have seen is I've seen catastrophic forgetting. I've seen
Yeah,
very intense hallucinations the more data you put into it. So I don't know. I have seen some interesting things where people like merge weights together. So you have like it like has like a state where it learns something, and then you kind of merge this other mode into
oh
the
yeah,
weights,
yeah,
and you
yeah.
can kind of so stuff like that is interesting. But when I'm thinking about real world use cases, uh, I totally agree with you. Bottom up. To me, the
Hundred
process
percent.
should be like, hey, so if I was well, I mean, this is kind of how it works within my company. I work on a team that builds tools for other teams within our company. Nothing I build is seen by a client. Everything I
Yeah,
build, other people in my company use to better the tools so that the clients use. We're kind of working around in the back end. And what we do every time, and it works every time, is we know we have a skill set or we have the ability to build a type of tool, like let's say an anomaly detection system. But what we're going to do is we're not going to go and say, we're going to build the most generic anomaly detection system and everyone in the company has to abide by our decisions. That's crazy. That's not useful. What we do is you find a few use cases, you sit with them, you build it out with them. It's a collaborative process, and you're taking in their insights, and you're getting this human in the loop, this human feedback to help make sure the model, as it grows, is hyper-aligned simply by walking side by side with the person building it or the team they're building it for. And then once you do that enough times, as a human, you'll start to realize the pattern inside your small domain. You'll be like, oh, it turns out most people in my company are actually kind of focused on this general principle.
Right.
So let's go ahead and try a generic thing without taking away all these nice little domain-specific use cases that they have for themselves. Let them keep that. And then if you can synthesize something that is generic enough to handle all those specific use cases, then that's like a really cool thing, and that's great. And I think companies do want to achieve that, and I think people should strive for that, especially within their company. But to think you're going to start at the perfect system and everyone will just adapt into it, it's like antithetical to the concept of learning. You know, like this is machine learning. This is not machine teaching. We're not building something and forcing people into a machine. We're taking a machine and saying, how can we mold these efficiencies to like your solution space?
Yeah.
What it's really about in my eyes.
And so do you think, so how would you approach, like, in terms of like really, it doesn't need to be pushing, but in terms of like making sure data literacy is a thing, how would you approach that in terms of like either education, like maybe there's like a series of like a 20-hour series of workshops that literally starts you like you don't even know like what a neural network is, or even before that, like you don't even know, you don't know what like a CSV file is, you know, like the base, like maybe there's like 20 workshops, and it's not, and so right now all this stuff is typically to get someone to be a machine learning engineer. That's like, or like data scientist, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying getting someone to a point where they don't get duped by AGI, like getting, you know what I mean? Or so that could be one path, but maybe there's another path of just maybe you don't even need to do that. Maybe there's a path where you just build tools, you know, like, so I don't know what it is. Like, what's your idea on that?
My idea is you can't force anyone to understand anything, but you can open as many, or you can lead people up to as many doors as possible. I'm all for data literacy. I think we should absolutely push that. I think that like people should be evangelizing, but if someone doesn't want to listen to you, don't shove it down.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean, it's like that. So that's how I kind of answer that. And then it's like, then on your own time, with the communities or your profession or whoever it is you work with, still build the tools. Continue to build the tools. Don't stop building the tools, because if you stop building the tools, someone else is going to build it, and you should just have a seat at the table. At the end of the day, everyone should have a seat at the table. But when it comes to data literacy, the way I think people should go about it, and this directly relates to how I got deep into data science. So prior to data science, like I said, I was heavy into music. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I'm still into music. But you know, by degree, I'm a composer and a jazz-based performance guy. That's like what it says on this piece of paper that I have, right? Yeah. So when I first learned data science, the very first things I did was learn what's music look like as like data. What does this mean? And then you start realizing, okay, well, there's like raw data that is like the audio, but then you realize like, oh, but there's also like data around how many people listen to this song on Spotify, or how many people have clicked on this thing. And then you start relating like data to social media, then you start relating data to like other sciences, and then you start thinking about like, how does data apply to my life? How do I turn into data? Like, what are my representations in data? Like, just a credit card. spreadsheet? Am I am I registered in the county I live in? Am I a part of that data set? And when you start getting people to contextualize the things they like in data and themselves as data, then they'll start to understand A, how someone could be viewing them, but B, how to use data to better the things that they're interested in. I promise you, everyone who's good at streaming, deep down, has an inkling of a data scientist inside themselves. Because everyone I know who's like killing it at streams, right? You gotta check the dashboards. You gotta like figure out your engagement. There's metrics. There's games. Another group of people who have data scientists deep inside of them. Every single gamer deep down is actually a data scientist, because you're gaming this system. You're taking in the information of this closed loop, and you understand the metrics. You understand what it means to move through the space, what the interactions imply, and how to forecast your score, how to forecast a win. That's all data science. That's like those are predictive algorithms in the back of your head that as humans we just naturally do. So it's about taking that insight and letting people know that they're kind of using it by having them focus on it through something that they enjoy.
Yeah.
Last thing I'll say to implement that is I think about how I learned math. I unfortunately they were probably very smart people, but the people who taught me math in high school, they did not make it make sense. They were like, here's the rules of these symbols, and the right people will know how to use them. The rest of you, like, good luck. You must be like a history person or something, whatever that means. But the second someone was like, it was physics when I first started to understand math and like it, because someone was like, who cares what the symbols are doing? We're trying to represent the motion of this ball. So we need this to represent the ball, this to represent the trajectory. And now that we have the representations, if we weigh them in a certain way, then we can see that gravity through this weight is pushing something down or pulling it down, however you want to think about it. And then the second it was contextualized, I was like, okay, I get it now. It's all about internal representations and quantities and relationships and how does that work with what I want to work with. But if you don't get people excited, they're not going to have that internal motivation to dig deep into this like hyper complex symbolic landscape. So you need to just tell people how it relates to them so that they can want to use it.
And I think when it comes to this, helped me a lot in learning concepts, especially when I'm like looking at something that I have no idea what it is, and I don't know the context of it or the history or the community behind it or whatever. Whenever I'm learning a new concept, one thing that really helps me a lot is realizing that every single educational material, everything that's like a reference book or anything, is really just a window into reality. It's just like every concept they talk about, every word they use is trying to kind of distill something that's just true. And it may not be fully accurate the way they're doing it, but they can use whatever words they want to do, but they're just trying, all these words are just a distillation or a mapping that has loss to it. So not everything's going to be a pure mapping, but it's a mapping to just the real, true reality of what the world is. And we try to interact with these concepts and educational materials to try to just learn more about how the world works. Like when you're reading a Python reference book, you're really just looking at someone trying to tell you how computers got to a point that they could do these things, and someone, when they made a language, like all these the higher level you get in programming language, they're just trying to make an interface to being able to communicate with how computers talk. Like it's all just more windows of abstraction, not how computers talk, but how computers like think, I guess. But like everything is just sort of a layer of abstraction, and it's not purely accurate. Like JavaScript's a very not inaccurate like distillation of the best way, like the most pure, truthful way you could program a computer, but it has some truth in it, and you can take from that. And that's why one good thing I find when like learning things is like, don't just learn one programming language, learn like 10 of them, and then you get to see recognize the proper patterns and get the most truthful concepts. It's like you look at 10 different programming languages across different domains, you're going to really know the value of memory. because you're going to
Yeah.
see like what that Python's garbage collector is flawed in some way, or I'm not saying it is, but you're going to see the
Oh,
flaws
it is.
there.
Okay.
Yeah, it is definitely.
Probably no thing. Yeah.
and and also like that's part of the reason why like it's like try writing like recursive functions in Python. It's like horrible, but like but yeah, so it's like, and then you'll see like what Java did, you'll see what C did, like you'll see like all these concepts, and then you'll actually understand like the truth more so with a low loss rate. And I think that's it. Like I do kind of get the AGI notion that you can look at so many different modalities and like have so much understanding that you can
Right.
get some sort of representation of the truth. But yeah, I actually
But how
think
useful is the abstraction at that point?
so. Not even that. I think humans are. I mean, I can't prove this, but I think humans are extremely advanced at that to an extent that it's not like I don't think we can fully comprehend how good humans are at learning things. I don't think it's
No,
something that
exactly.
computers can. Maybe I'm a luddite, but I just don't think a computer can ever learn with the complexity of a human. Like it doesn't really. Maybe someone could explain it to me, but it doesn't make that much sense.
Well, even if in the current state, even if we did have a computer that could have this like crazy internal representation that was like perfectly accurate and have like this world model, I would just implore people to look at how much energy, how many GPUs, and how many workers and the carbon footprint it takes just to keep OpenAI up. And they're just a language model company, right? They're
Yeah.
just doing the language part. I would implore people to investigate what is Amazon's carbon footprint for hosting all of these
Also,
clouds.
look up RLHF. That's all you need to know. I talked about it on a couple streams ago where I was just like I was sort of learning the concept on the stream, and I'm like, okay, so if your if your backwards pass is essentially this like stop and human check and then restart process, like
Mhm.
how is that going to scale to a point where you need to like learn with that complexity of a human like that? For me,
Yeah.
that does that. So in another thing, it's like look at like something like Slumdog Millionaire. This is the best example that I was trying to think of an example of why computers can't solve problems like humans, and the best thing I can do is reference a movie. I apologize, but Slumdog Millionaire, like every time he's answering these questions, he's looking back to a memory from his past that fit into the narrative that's being relayed to him, and there's like emotional chords that strike up. Like imagine you can't maybe you could, but some sort of shortcut to memory simply because there's this like emotional response that's due to
Right.
some attachment. That's a layer of complexity that I'm like,
Yep.
how do you code that? Like
But you could also think of it as like basically like another attention mechanism that is using a rule system that's different than like an information like
Okay.
attention mechanism. There could be like
Interesting.
an emotional pathway through the graph that can cut through the knowledge pathway. So I don't
Interesting.
think
Yeah.
I don't think the complexities are not achievable.
Hmm.
I just think at what is the cost and how useful is it going to be?
Yeah.
Because like here's just another more real world example to bring it a little bit more to ground.
Yeah.
But it's like I was working on an anomaly detection system, and we built out this really cool thing. It was like LSTM, big auto encoder. Like we're making these massive models, and we're kind of combining them together so they're communicating and they're checking all these aspects of the system. And man, the output of that stuff was super phenomenal. To be honest, the level of detail that we could get out of taking snapshots of the system throughout all of these models working together was great. However, we were able to accomplish the same end with a single isolation forest and no training data. It's just a decision tree that fits to the data at that moment. Picks out the things we're interested in, gives it back, gone.
Yeah.
Now, it's not as sexy as a story, but talking bottom line, dude, we're saving so many resources and doing just the simplest thing that we need to do. So that's where I keep thinking, like, all right, so let's imagine this world where we have the super AI that's like centralized, and it's so beautiful and so abstract that it can represent everything as a square. Well, what does that mean to anybody? It's just kind of like, cool, this thing understands the world and it says that it's a square. I still need to live my life, so I don't know what that square is supposed to do for me.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing too. We are not working for the AI. Like, the AI works for us. It is our It is not, like, to get into this mindset that it's bigger and better. No. You're just giving your power to whoever owns the AI. That's it. Like, there is no person in the machine. The thing is literally not alive ever, and if it ever was alive, maybe during inference. And that's it. So to think that it's like this person.
But someone might try to do that. Someone might try to think of some way to have constant, constant
inference?
Like constant observation, like just constantly throwing it the information.
But even then, it's only alive for the second the math has occurred.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like alive, dead, and maybe you do that so fast and so quick, like a movie where it kind of comes to life. Like, a movie's just a series of snapshots, right?
Right.
I think artificial intelligence is just a rapid series of computations that appears in emotion to us as intelligence.
Right.
But in reality, it's just really small, fast, sequential steps that are just moving faster than we can comprehend. So it's like, wow, this is like, same thing with the movie, right? Like, you're sitting there and you're just like, it's so beautiful. But in reality, it's actually just like whatever the frame rate is per second, right?
One thing, so I did want to, before we get too in the weeds there, I did want to because you're working on cool stuff, and I don't know how much you want to sort of get into that. I did want to, because I feel like we're talking about a lot of AI issues, and I think that in terms of a lot of the stuff you're working on and stuff that I'm working on or trying to research and work on, there's some resolutions happening, and I'm curious. Well, first we can just talk about word embeddings or whatever you want to talk about, but it'd be interesting to talk about the concept of token space as well. That's something that I haven't heard talked about a ton, that you're talking about before, and so whatever you wanna talk about with that.
Yeah, definitely. What I'll say about a token space is basically, it's like I think of it as it's ultimately the learned vocabulary of a model. So going back to word embeddings, let's say you take a word to vet model and you train it on a single document. That document comes from the token space, but it's not the token space itself. The token space is the learned representation of that document's relationships. Right. And so I liken it a lot to the feature space in a more classical ML scenario. So I always think of the housing data set where you try to figure out location, size, amenities. You have these 10 dimensions or whatever. Well, those 10 dimensions are a feature space, and when we think of the model as representing the world through those 10 features, well, with the token space, it's a semantic version of that, essentially, where token space is the internal graph of the model's word representation, and it's its own statistical knowledge graph that has probabilities and essentially is what is the engine towards any type of output. That's how I think about it. Right. And why I think about that is, and I actually am not going to talk too much about this. It's some science and research that is that personally I'm just being selfish with. It's something I've stumbled across, and I am kind of loving it right now, and I just want to research it and kind of have a few dates with it and have a nice little love affair before I give it to the world. But in its essence, what I think is possible is, I think inference in one space should equal an equivalent but materially different result in another space, if that can make sense. And that is essentially what I'm trying to figure out how to bridge that inference inside the different spaces. So like, just to really sum it up, is like, if I'm in the housing model feature space, I want to be able to make an accurate prediction inside that feature space, and then take the location in that feature space, translate it into another feature space, and without having that other feature space run an inference, pull out the equivalently equal like position in the two different spaces, and figure out what type of transformation is necessary for those inferences to be equivalent. I think in the future it could be used as a way of saving compute, because if you can just run a few inferences and then take that result and then just transform that inference into different models and get those results out without running inference, that to me I think could be a useful tool.
That'd be awesome. Yeah. And I feel like that could also have some potential in fine tuning, if you kind of, I don't know how that would work, but like if that's an idea where you sort of can see, because the fine tuning space is getting huge right now, and that's like something that today I had a whole deep dive on P tuning and llama adapter, and I was just like trying to kind of, because I've only really been in the LoRa mindset of fine tuning so far, and really kind of like looking at a lot of different methods. But yeah, it would be interesting if there's something that could be done where it's like, maybe if you find this kind of like one-to-one relationship in some smaller sense, maybe there's a way to save that. And I don't know. I actually don't know how that would work.
So to me, it's like, it's less about saving weights, and it's more about understanding like the motion in the probability space.
Yeah.
So just follow me a little bit here, and let's just say that intelligence occurs in like a three-dimensional space. And I'm not even going to try to make up what those axes mean, but let's just say there's 3 dimensions to intelligence, and you have these connections between nodes. So now a model inside of this 3D space is essentially this like big, it's like this big graph. I think of like, it's this big graph, right? And you know, if you actually want, you can think of it as a 2D graph. I like the 3D thing for my own thing, but if you want, if it's easier for people to think about a 2D node edges graph, that's fine. Once you start with that, you're like in a mathematical space, and there should be intuitions about what happens if you shift the probabilities through the graph like this. What happens if you remove some nodes? How does that change how everything connects to each other? What if I just insert a bunch of nodes? How does that change what's going on? And what I want to see more of is not like, oh, I have to save this model and I have all my different fine-tuned LoRa lookups. Can, like slow go in all these different ways. And I think that's great progress, and I think it's going in the right direction, and I encourage everyone to keep focusing on that. But I also want people to ask, you don't need a map once you understand the intuition of your city. Once you understand how the road works. Like Manhattan's super simple. You got north, you got south, you got east, you got west. There's one little area, like down in the Lower East Side, kind of Greenwich Village area, where there's some cockamamie stuff going on, and then a few other areas in the financial district. But for the most part, if you want to go somewhere, you just know, oh, is it uptown, is it downtown, is it east or west?
Yeah.
And you know. That, we don't have that intuition for knowledge space yet.
Yeah.
We might have it with our, like, I like this idea of like the 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon. Somehow everyone's connected to Kevin Bacon in 6 steps. That to me is getting a little closer to what I'm talking about, where it's like, wait, we have this intuition about how social networks work, where we can just say this general axiom and kind of feel like it's true. And I think some people have even tried to study that idea that you actually can connect most people to Kevin Bacon within 6 hops or something like that. But what I want to do, and what I'm interested in, is what if we can garner that intuition of token space? And so that it doesn't matter when or where, but once we're plopped into token space and we get our bearings, we can say, oh, if I want to have this information, I need to lean in this direction.
Yeah.
You can kind of shift the model over here, or in fact, actually, I'm going to kind of go over here and do things. And then you would basically be able to take inference from a huge, large model and bring it down and move your model around.
Yeah.
The distilled inference. And then, one, you're saving on inference, but also, two, there's no extra memory. You're just moving things around.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not, you're not storing states and loading them in and out. You just now learn the physics of the intelligence space and how to move around in it. That is what I'm very excited for.
You're kind of just doing like one pass essentially, like to do that. Like, am I correct about? Well, we don't have to get into the idea too much, but like, yeah, it's just one translation of the weights.
It depends how. If it depends what you would want to do. Like that would be like saying like, if I want to go down the hall into like an apartment down the hall, I would just have to go out my door, make a left, and make a right, and then I'm in that room, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that could be perceived as a translation
I see what you're
of
saying.
steps.
I see what you're saying.
But you know, I just think of it as like it's. I don't want to totally frame it as problems that are already solved. I do like thinking about it as a translation problem because there's insights into that world, but I'm not going to limit the problem to a translation problem. I think there's a lot more to it, and that's why I just want to get into a space where we're just not thinking about. It's less about fine-tuning. It's less about iteratively like changing the model. It's just more about like, if I have a state, do I have enough knowledge or intuition to do something to that state in a very direct, transparent way that shifts it to another state?
Yeah.
And I think we can do that. I mean, I think we can see that in a lot of places in math. So I'm just kind of like, why not try that with AI?
That's fascinating.
I think the reason people think it's impossible in their mind is the whole thing about AI, right? Is that it's read all, it's the whole thing is that it's superhuman, that it's taken all the information and it's able to recognize patterns that humans can't pick up on. But I disagree with that. I think that the patterns that AI picks up on, the second you realize the AI has picked up on it, you're like, oh, that makes sense actually. Yeah, I actually see where that comes from. That's where we get intuition for black boxes. Like black box AI, the best way to do it is just start looking at the output and try to understand the input. And then you're kind of like, oh, it must be doing something like this because I'm smart enough as a human to understand what it was trying to do. So if you can come to that conclusion, if a model was transparent and you could open up all the weights and see every layer, why wouldn't you be able to then shift all those things around to have a little bit more control over it?
Yeah. That's fascinating. I would say one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, like, if you were, for anyone right now who has some aptitude or whatever and they want to go all in into data science and into specifically like the language modeling, these sequential models with word tokens and all that, like what would your advice be for them to, like, maybe even a pathway or like a 1 week study entry point course of like, how do I go all in so they're in the best direction so that they're not like, so that the way things are moving, they don't get like, swept out of the water or whatever that means.
Right.
Yeah.
So the first thing I would say is be wary of the satisfaction tutorials give you. That's the first thing I would tell anyone, because I mean I can go online and today I could probably build a full-on application based on a tutorial. But when I would walk away from that, would I be able to do it for a job and make it scalable and
100%.
make it, a whole thing? So, but if you just want to study it, and get into it and play with it, then I would say, to be honest, don't rush yourself. Just do tutorials, read the books, They're out there. At this point, I can only tell you ones that I like, but to be honest, there are so many.
What
I
are
would
some
just say,
books?
what?
What are some books you like?
Designing Machine Learning Systems, that by Chip Hewen. That one's amazing.
Yeah.
That's a really good practical one on how the systems of machine learning can work. But going into language stuff, I mean, the whole O'Reilly, Manning's book publications, all of those are great for hands-on tutorials and like quick explanations of things. When you get into textbooks, I mean, I would just start with like, you know what, okay, so here's what I would do without trying to just go through like a litany of recommendations.
Yeah.
But like what I would try to do is start off with something that's functional. So start off with like something that you can pull down to your computer and you can play with, so that you can start to get the input output feel, so that you understand this is kind of the overall objective. Then I would start walking it back some. So what I would do is start with like bring down the transformer, just have it in like a Jupyter notebook, bring down like use the transformers library, copy and paste their little like tutorial code, run the cell so that you have an input and have an output, and do that for a while so you just get this intuition of what the possibilities are, so that you can see the end goal of where you want to be and what it kind of looks like a little bit. Then walk it back and say, all right, what's it take to train a model though? That's one that's trained and I pull it down, but what's it take to train a model? Then you go, okay, let's play with fine tuning for a bit. And then once you understand what the real magic behind fine tuning is and the control you have, then it's kind of like, all right, so I know what the end result interacting with the model is like. Okay, now I know what fine tuning is like. Then it's like, okay, what would it take to, do it from scratch? How could I, go find an implementation of a transformer like from scratch in Python. Check out Andrew Karpathy's. Like
love that video.
GPT, TinyGrad, all that stuff is awesome.
Yeah.
Check out George Hotz. Like his stuff is great to learn from. And then put yourself in the scenario where you've kind of like trained a model from scratch, which will force you to interact with compute limitations, GPU, the cloud infrastructure. It'll force you to understand what good data is, what bad data is, what feature engineering is, what auto encoding is, and when it's better to do that versus maybe clean up and do a little bit of stuff to your text before you pass it in.
Nice.
It's just going to force you to confront that. And then once you've done that process where you're like, okay, I've gathered data, I've processed data, I've trained a model, I've saved a model, and I've inferenced with the model. Once you've gotten that down, then what you should honestly do is go, all right, what's the history of these models?
Yeah.
Like, how did we get to the transformer? Like, how does this come from linear regression? Like, what are these steps? And that's what I would do. And if you want to focus just on language, I would go from like linear regression to non-linear modeling to sequential modeling. I would go from like a NLP, like neural net, and then I would jump right into RNNs, LSTMs, transformers. Like that's like the path that I would take if I just wanted to look at sequential stuff. Like CNNs, diffusers, that world, the whole litany of linear and non-linear classical ML models, from decision trees to gradient boosting to support vector machines, all that stuff. I actually think that stuff's more useful in the long run right now anyways. If you're in the profession, it's a lot more useful to have a super good grasp of classical ML and be able to implement it fast and light. But that's how I would do it. I would start with a finished product so you get a sense of what, because here's the reason what I don't want to do. I don't want someone to not understand what their end goal is and then be like, go learn statistics. It's just too much of a
high school
to wrap your head around without knowing the end goal.
100%. Well, what would you say was your like aha moment of like, you're like, okay, like I get it now, like when it comes to machine learning, and you're because, and the reason why I'm asking you this, just for anyone watching, is that like Matt's largely self-taught. I mean, he's really just like a self-taught 20x dude. So it's really valuable to hear that perspective. Like, what would you say is that aha moment for you?
The big thing for me was essentially realizing that at its core, the operations are simple vector operations. They're
Yeah.
just happening at a rate and a speed and a depth that is mind-boggling.
Right.
And when you really accept that you're just working with vectors and matrices, I mean, it depends on how fluent you are with matrices, but matrices to me are a universal representation of things. Like a matrix can represent how things correlate. A matrix can represent signals side by side. A matrix can represent an image. A matrix can represent a paragraph. A matrix could represent a graph. You know, and
Just
once
data.
you realize that,
Yeah.
exactly. Once you realize that that it's really about taking an observation and just translating it to a data representation, it's then just statistics on top of that. So that was kind of like the core understanding where I was like, oh, this is just transformations of vectors. Essentially, that's all that's happening, essentially. I mean, it's complex, but that's all that's happening. But the real moment was actually when I trained an LSTM on MIDI music, because it was what I had done was, I just took like a vanilla LSTM. The final product was using like a form of self-attention and some auto encoding stuff. But basically, by just taking this vanilla LSTM and training it on, like basically overfitting it to some MIDI sequences and then popping it out, again, it just gave me that intuition. I was like, all right, so like, and again, I happen to know a lot about music. I happen to know a lot about composition. So for me, the key that I say to everyone else too is start with something you're very familiar with.
Yeah.
If you happen
100%.
to be like the inventory manager at a warehouse, use inventory data. Like start using that so you immediately see how it relates.
Yeah.
For me, it was MIDI music. And so like I was like, okay, I understand principles of MIDI music. And then what I started doing was, so for example, I knew something about the composer that I was feeding the model to. And what I knew about it was the general keys that the composer plays in. So when I'm training the model, it sucked at first. Like, I mean, sometimes it would just come out with strings of like the same note over and over and over. But what I realized over time was, wait a second, it's learning the key first, because this note that's repeating is the key of the song. Like every time in these first couple phases, it's like, oh, it's learning the key first. And then once I gave it more iterations and things like that, you start to understand what's happening statistically throughout the layering and throughout the progress of the model, because you're sitting there looking at it's a tedious process and you've got to want to do it. But that was my big aha moment when it clicked to me that the key, what was being learned first within the specific experiment that I was running. And once that clicked, I was able to start to have intuition about what it would learn next.
Right.
Like
Interesting.
how it would, and then as I started confirming those intuitions, then I was able to be like, wait a second, I can think of a whole system now, and I can understand what it should do.
Yeah.
And then I got into that workflow, and then now it's to the point where, I'm sitting here being like, yeah, I have an intuition about like how intelligence entropy should like work inside a vector space. Like for some people that might not mean anything, but for me it's like, yeah, I don't think I could have had that conversation 8 years ago, but now I feel like I'm like pushing the limitations of that conversation. But it all came by immersing myself specifically with data that I was hyper literate in, and using a really simple model that could be understood, and playing with it until that intuition clicked as to what was supposed to happen.
And what would you say, like, with the fact that everything is essentially a matrix or a vector, and these are all representations of data, and that's like extremely important core to it. What would you say to all the people learning AI right now? At what stage? Because we also kind of mentioned like, don't just learn stats first without a goal. But there is this aside where everyone kind of, and this happens with everyone learning anything like intellectually intensive, whether it's like software engineering or this thing, is that people are often like, do I do like a phase of fundamentals first or not? Like, what would you say to someone that's at what point do you think someone should if you think they ever should, do a linear algebra course or deep dive or something like that?
It depends on what you're trying to achieve. If
Mhm.
you are someone who is trying to crack into the space fast, to be honest, what you need to do is you need to understand just the current implementations and
Mhm.
market yourself as an applied engineer who can give you the results. And then once you've landed the thing that you want to land, and I want to say this, I am not saying fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
I don't really believe in the idea of lying to people until
Of
you know
course.
how it works.
Of course.
But what I would say is make it on just so for example, let's say you want to get into AI and you want to work for an AI company. You can either go the route of being like, all right, I'm going to start at linear algebra and in 10 years I'll get my job, but that's fine too. Nothing wrong with that. Or you can say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to learn how to interpret outputs of models. I'm going to learn how to validate models. I'm going to learn how to fine tune models. I'm not going to give a lot of focus right now to building them from scratch because a lot of industries are just going to be using these foundation models. And get yourself into that little mindset. And then once you're useful and you're productive in that space, and you have kind of the time, then go back and teach yourself the fundamentals.
100%.
You know what I mean? And you can't cut yourself short, and don't let the people down who've given you the chance. You know, if you get that opportunity, you need to go back and do. I do fundamentals once a week. I legitimately, there's a handful of textbooks that I go to, and like just 2 weeks ago, I was like, all right, I'm going to go through principal component analysis again and understand how that relates to singular value decomposition, and I'm going to code them from scratch.
Yeah.
I'm going to do that, and that's my weekend, and that's what I'm going to do for this weekend. I don't do that necessarily every weekend, but once a week I do a little bit of a deep dive still. And I'm like, half a decade into this, and I'm still like every day, every week, something about fundamentals, because you're never going to grasp the true nature of fundamentals. I truly believe that.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with music, even. Like every now and then, I'm just like, you know what? I'm going to go study for a few hours on like why a major chord is a major chord. Even though I know it's a major third and like a minor third, I understand the intervals, I understand the implications, I understand all this stuff. But what happens every time is when I read the fundamental again, there's a new dimension exposed to me where I'm like, oh, I guess that's true too. You know, and so that is.
Oh, dude, I was reading about stacks and heaps the other day, which is that's like the first thing you learn about memory, and just the other day I was like, I need to like brush up on this because like if you're operating higher level languages all the time, you don't have to deal with that, and it's just like you're right. It's like fundamentals never end at all.
It's crazy, yeah.
You know,
and hopefully not, because they're the fundamental thing. If that stuff ends, how is anything on top of it going to work?
And real quick, like just for anyone who's like new, sort of, because there's been a lot of people kind of contacting me because I do like a lot of mentoring and teaching of like newer developers.
Yeah, you're a phenomenal resource.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank
absolutely.
You. Yeah,
anyone who's watching, like shamelessly, like Jared is one of these people who it's like, I mean, just watch his streams, continue to watch him, you'll see one of these people who is not only like killing it and like his ability to do things, but your ability to talk through it and relate it to people is a
thanks, man.
Good, like skill as an educator, 100%.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I try to my best at it. Yeah, but yeah, I think if anyone wants to, like, one thing that you said that I think is super important for anyone that's like watching this and you're trying to learn like on your own, right? And this is something that a lot of people miss that you mentioned is you have to be useful first. Like that's the best thing if you really want to like have that, because the real because you're not in high school anymore, you know, you're not in middle school anymore, you don't have this like endless time. I made this funny tweet yesterday where it was like, like if you're trying to learn how to code to get a job right now, really accept the fact, or like really understand the fact that you're competing with every 15-year-old virgin that has endless time who's trying to learn this stuff, because it's like you don't have that endless time. If you want to make the most use of your time, position yourself to be useful. If you don't know what that is, talk to someone who knows what that is, or try to engage with the community to know what that is. Because the thing that you've done is you got useful as fast as possible, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you got useful as fast as possible, and then you just now have tons of time to just like do whatever you want, because when you're useful in this world, people give you resources.
Exactly.
And then with resources as an adult, you get that extra time, right? So
I think
yeah.
you nailed it. Like, and it was a little bit of a gauntlet, to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
there was this, like, being useful is not a trivial task. Like, it is there's a lot of focus. So when I first went into it, like, my first usefulness, even though my title was data scientist, what I was actually doing for the company was I was just kind of like analyzing data, building up their SQL servers, running like kind of SQL automation pipelines, and like maybe sprinkling a little bit of like random forest like here and there. But they needed someone that they thought the title was data science, and what they needed to do, I knew how to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that, and then, like you said, you build up reputation, you build up credibility, and then you're able to talk to more people who will give you opportunities. And the biggest thing that anyone who's trying to find a job right now or in this space, there are two thoughts that I have even to this day, which is it's extremely fortunate
Mm-hmm.
and it is super lucky when someone gives you an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And to follow that up with it, you are not entitled or owed anything. Like, you're not
100%.
entitled to anything. You are not owed to anything. You need to, through merit and credibility,
Yeah.
make someone want to give you something, and that's just how it works. And now maybe
100%.
some people, I don't know, some people might not like that type of talk. I know there's people who don't agree with that, but I really do think that like it's about getting close with people who you can help solve a problem,
100%.
and then you solve that problem for them, and then they realize your value, so they enrich you so that you become more valuable to them. And if it works in a truly like meritocracy type of way, you eventually become a partner with that person you are helping,
Right.
because you're now a peer who just has a different skill set than them, and they're clearly helping you in a lot of ways by giving you these opportunities, so it becomes a symbiosis.
Yeah, and no one starts out. So one problem with a lot, I think it started probably in the millennial generation, and it's still happening, where a lot of people think that you get trained for leadership, and it's like, no, you gotta you gotta be at the low points to really become something, and you have to
Exactly.
you have to be very humble to your position first, and then you eventually you gain confidence. And it's like a lot of imposter syndrome is sorry for anyone watching, it's real. You don't belong there. like no, I mean, I'm kind of playing about that, but it's like
Yeah.
like you gotta it's normal that you feel like an imposter, because you do have to prove yourself, and you don't always feel like an imposter. That's just a fact. Like, you eventually you feel like you're a part of something, and it's because you worked for it, you know.
Exactly.
Oh yeah, and another thing, which I think I forgot. Totally forgot. What was the point? It was about learning. Well, continue with what you were saying. Maybe it'll refresh my mind.
Right. So being useful, you're not entitled to things. That's kind of the conversation I was having. Meritocracy, you build yourself up. Yeah, I mean, I kind of think like that's really what I had to say about it.
Okay.
I mean, for me, my biggest mindset in general is I just really, and I mean, this is for life. It helps in everything, and it helps me in AI. It helps me in my creative endeavors and all of that stuff. But I use this phrase: I don't have to do anything. No one can make me
Right.
do anything. I get to do these things. I don't have to go to work. I don't have to wake up. I don't have to work out. I get to do all
Right.
those things. And because I get to do all those things, you better believe I'm going to do it with 110%, because
Yeah.
there's going to be a day where I can't do those things,
Yeah.
and I will be so upset to have known I had the opportunity and didn't do it. So if you can wrap yourself up in that mindset, and you truly want to like get through the process, then like you'll probably be fine in the industry. It's just going to come down to the other hard part of life, which is networking and luck. Like those are the other two things. I remember something. I think this was online when we were saying with leadership. I just want to tap into that. You're right. Think about this. If you had a guy who had been working as a low-level engineer, never made it past a certain level of whatever, but's been in the industry for 40 years, and you've got a 20-year-old who has a master's in leadership, I'm taking the 40-year-old guy any day.
Yeah.
He might have bad communication skills. He might make me feel like crap and be like not like PC about things. He could be offensive. But if my goal is to be led through this specific knowledge set, that's the guy. He's got the experience. That 20-year-old, all he's telling us is kind of like what he's been taught, because he has there's no reference for that individual outside of the experience of what they believe is going to be
also
the scenario.
Yeah, like having really good, being able to benefit from people with really good communication skills and a lack of inherent knowledge. A lot of that, in my opinion, is largely a result of just being in a very wealthy nation. Typically, you don't have the luxury of having a lot of really good people to say nice things to you. It's the mean person that knows more than you telling you to, shut the F up and do your job. And that actually keeps the bridges up. I think like that's, but the thing that I just remembered is a lot of with the networking part that what you're saying, that a lot of that's sort of like another edge. This is something that I've tried to live by in times where I needed to make something happen and nothing happened, and it's super basic. It sounds almost dumb, but there's 3 laws to opportunity that I just like have to live by, and it's something that you're sort of talking about, like it's the spirit that you have to have in when you're just like at the lowest rank in something. And it's super basic, but it's like you have to do these 3 things and opportunities will just open up. It's like, 1, you have to ask questions. You have to be someone that's asking people questions that in situations, even if it seems like the person doesn't have much to say, you have to be able to find the interesting thing about people, especially if they're in positions of seniority and they know more than you about things. You have to ask questions. And then 2, you have to actually offer help. So, like, it might have to be for free, but it doesn't have to be, but it might have to be. But you have to sort of be in a position where you're like, okay, let's say you're some junior developer and you're like, you don't have anything to do. It's like, you may want to like ask someone like if they need help with something, or even if it's something super small, and you might be surprised if someone's like, you know what, yeah, actually, could you do this for me if you have some free time? And if you're networking, you don't even have a job, you could just like go position yourself into some tech event or networking event and like talk to someone, and it may seem silly, and they may be talking about how they're an accountant, they have their own accounting firm, be like, hey, if you need any help doing books or something, I don't know about that, but I'm a person that's real and I can help you. You'd be surprised how many people are just like, oh, okay, because a lot of people, especially everything's online now, so much opportunity. It's like you don't see anyone in person. If you just see someone in person and they're just like, yeah, like I like talking to you and like I'll help you out, like you'd be surprised how many doors will open up. And the last thing is that this is the most important thing, is you have to follow up. You have to follow through. So you have to like actually show up. Show up is the main thing to the things that people like, to the things that the opportunities that come up. It's like, if you actually show up when someone like says some side thing like, oh yeah, we're all doing this thing later, it's like you should show up. like like there's a training over here and like, no one really wants to do it. Be the one person that shows up to it, It may be that the teacher is super excited and it's just you and them and you guys like become friends or something. So that's a little aside. If anyone's like, because engineers aren't that social typically, and understanding a framework for getting out there, and I feel like it helped me out so much in my life.
Yeah, I wanna tag that. It's like it's interesting to me that there is this kind of aura or stereotype around engineers that they're not social. Every engineer I know is actually really social. They just don't know how to communicate the thing that they do a lot. They, you know what I mean?
Interesting.
That's what I find interesting because like I promise you, like yeah, I sit on a in an area with a lot of engineers and they talk a lot. They just for some reason don't talk a lot about what they're doing, and they talk about other things going on, and they're like, which is cool. That's great. That's how people bond. Nothing wrong with that. But what I've learned is that there needs to be a stronger push that engineering is not this. We have a genius in the basement who's doing it all up.
True,
No,
yeah.
I don't even care about the product that one
Yeah.
person built fully alone, unless, give it one caveat, unless the intention is to open source it and build a community off that product. I think that that's
Right.
I love that person. Let's make it happen. But specifically in the professional world, the real game is realizing that engineering and coding is it's like a living action that it takes multiple minds to actually do. You know what I mean? So if you're going to try to solve a problem for a company, like at minimum, you should ideally just be working with one other person, even if it's just someone who's checking you and being like, hey, you said you're going to have this done. Is it done yet? It could be as minimal as an accountability partner.
Yeah.
But the second you fold someone into the loop and you get past your own anxieties of failing or not being able to do the
100%.
thing or looking stupid in front of someone, when you get past all that, I personally have found way more joy in like working with a team and accepting where my ideas have limitations and merging them with another person's ideas and feeling that we're both learning and there's trade-offs and we're seeing this product develop that I know that I would have never built that fast on my own in my own room. Now, that being said, I still do love research. I do spend time by myself building things and I find that extremely valuable. But the real magic for me is when I'm with a team of people and we have like a big objective and we're all coming together in this kind of CI type of pipeline and we're, I love seeing GitHubs with tons of pull requests and huge conversations around every little detail. That to me is so much more exciting than like one guy's initial commit is the full program. I'm like, all right, cool. I mean, that's cool, but I'm more so interested in the process that built this up and the reason we're all here doing it.
And also with the communication side of things, I think there's a lot of culture in engineering around being sort of in a silo and you kind of like do magic and then make other people happy because of the result and all that. When really I think, and I'm very happy that at a young age I got really used to teaching other people like coding and stuff, and also writing my readmes for my little weird open source projects that I would make, and trying to write it in a way that was almost markety, because I think that it's a skill to be able to build things, but it's also a skill to be able to communicate large ideas to something that makes sense, and ideas that literally have they make no sense to the person you're going to talk to unless you put in work. And I think a part of the social thing is that muscle of like, okay, how do I communicate word embeddings to like someone that could really benefit from the technology, but they're 60 and they have never used a computer. It's like
Exactly.
it's like if you can make that pathway, you could save a mom and pop store because you applied some IT knowledge or some engineering knowledge that they would have never known. And if you can communicate that thing, that's what makes you an engineer. It's like one of my heroes in the engineering world is Henry Ford, and a part of what made him such a genius was that, well, one, he was a self-taught 10x engineer, of course, but two, he was able to like translate. His whole thing was the greatest good for the greatest many. He was able to translate things that seemed crazy to a lot of people, and things that seemed too technical, and too like, it's like, oh, it's like, how do I mean, the shifting and the gears and the clutch was like really complex back then, but like he slowly translated that to an audio. It was like, wait, I have a horse. Why do I need a big machine on my in my farm? He was able to translate that from his engineer. He was an engineer first from that perspective, and I think that's like real power. It's you're right. It isn't just like the dude in the basement that is disconnected. You even look at someone like Linus Torvalds. It's like he's a great communicator. People don't like the way he communicates, but he's a great communicator. Linux itself, the whole system is communicating to you like how it works really, really well. Like Unix,
Yes.
Dennis Ritchie, like in C, if I look at a C program, it's communicating to me how the machine works and how assembly works with just the syntax of it. Like
Exactly.
so it's like, if you don't understand communication, like all the best engineers are great, excellent communicators to some extent, even if it's just their code. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think an example of a failed communicator is Nikola Tesla. Well, no, seriously though.
Yeah, no, I get you. Yeah.
He was a brilliant person who had the ear of J.P. Morgan and like the Rockefeller, that whole like robber baron, like mega oligarch class. Like he had their ear. He was at the table with them and had really good ideas, but was just not able to communicate it in a way where they were like, hey, we find that valuable, we want to give you the resources. Someone like Thomas Edison did instead. And the irony is, like, Tesla and, his name is escaping me, but it's the guy who did the Chicago Fair. Let me just look this up really quick. This guy, it's gonna kill me.
The people who funded Tesla?
No.
Oh.
This Nikola Tesla was just a good friend with the Chicago Fair Lights. Let's see what company this was. Oh, I know it's. We gotta get this. Hold on. The second, who won the contract? It would be the Westinghouse Corporation.
Oh, Westinghouse. Yeah.
Yes. So their whole thing was AC current, which like Tesla, like there was like a communication with them, right? I don't have like detailed knowledge of the history. I have kind of a survey of it. So those out there, if I'm like get this a little wrong, burn me in the comments if you want. But like, but basically, like alternating current is clearly more profitable and clearly a better like route. We know that now, actually. We don't do direct current really, but Edison, he figured out DC, and he was like willing to push, and he did some dirty tricks here and there, but he was able to communicate the value of what he's done, even when it wasn't the most valuable thing, to a point where he won a lot of contracts, to the point where we think of Thomas Edison, we think of electricity. Yeah. Right? We don't think. I had to look up the guy's name, Westinghouse, and he had the better system at the time. Yeah. It's a huge deal to be able to communicate. Now, a great communicator of our time, ironically enough, centered around the word Tesla, is Elon Musk.
Oh,
probably one of the most prolific
he is good.
Engineers.
No matter what you think of him, he's good. Yeah.
Yeah, the only other person who I think had the same skill set of the engineering knowledge and the talking knowledge was Steve Jobs. And I think Steve Jobs
100%
excelled way beyond Elon Musk, because I don't think there's anyone who has like a bad image of Steve Jobs in their mind, other than maybe his daughter, his ex-wives, and people he lived with. But like,
a lot of people don't like him, but like, a lot of people don't like Steve. I always push back and just to be like, I mean, like, you try to, because they'll say that he's not, like, he wasn't a real engineer and all that stuff, but it's like, you can't effectively market, in the 70s, computers to people without being an engineer. To some extent, it's impossible. He grew up building tons of things with his dad, doing circuitry, He was an engineer. That's facts.
Absolutely. And it's like, I mean, it takes many ICs to build a product for a team, but
Yeah.
what? So yeah, so no, so the whole idea that he's not an engineer, I think that's a failed argument.
It would be impossible for him not to be.
It's you don't just have insights like that.
No.
You don't do it consistently throughout your career. If you only had like one product and Wozniak was like, yeah, I built that, this guy's lying,
Right.
and there's only one product, then maybe. But he has the record. But with Elon Musk too, it's just like this guy. His magic is he's a very smart engineer. He genuinely knows the ins and outs of all this stuff. But on top of that, he's also an amazing entrepreneur and VC.
Yes.
He sees, because he's such a good engineer, he sees companies that are already doing the thing he wants to achieve, and then he buys them and repurposes the technology and adds in the scaffolding to take it to the level that he wants. I think Neuralink is a perfect example. That company was already kind of doing its own thing and was doing really, their initial product was, I think, for to create vision for the blind.
Yeah.
Similar to like people who have cochlear implants who are deaf and can now hear. That's where they were starting, and he saw how advanced they were with it, and he was like, you know what? I'm a tastemaker. I can tell this company has the taste. Let's put the money, let's put the branding in, let's get my shareholders to back them as well. Neuralink.
Yeah.
We have it. So that doesn't come out of just a privileged MBA, 25-year-old who's like, yeah, I took all the courses.
And and also one thing that I'm seeing now is, so one big reason why I'm starting to stream now, a few weeks ago I was like, I want to stream a lot, is mostly because I think there's a lot of the way things are going in the world, in the coding world. One, there's a huge misalignment. There's a huge people training in this is truth. This is like hard. This is the harsh truth. There's a ton of people training to be engineers that will never be engineers, and make
absolutely.
money. And the part of the reason, part of it's market forces. So there's a reality to the fact that it's just you can't sustain that amount of people training for when the automation is on the rise. So it's like it's just a math equation, right? But also because I think there's not a lot of that like grit of like, how do I get this done in the best way, or how do I get this done without needing anyone's help, like on my own, like how do I set this up, how do I gain all, which is partially how I learned how to code. I was like, I had an entrepreneurial spirit as a kid, and I was like, I want to start startups, but I don't want to depend on a software engineer, like I think that's like being able to have this like pathological need to know how things work so you don't have to depend on someone is a cultural thing that I think is like super important. And I think right now one of the best things you can do is, if you're getting out of college and you're like you want to be in tech and all this, is to, in my opinion, really focus on becoming an independent engineer, an independent developer that can build things and make, and that can do the whole stack. And I don't just mean the tech stack, I mean you can actually find a problem, solve it, build it, market it, sell it, do the whole thing, and have a business, and not just be like, oh well, I'm just an engineer nerd. It's like, no, you're someone that can use your ability to create wealth. And the only reason why you don't think you can do that is because your college and your high school trained you to think you're like a cog in a wheel, when the reality is, if you can learn like a lot of these systems with computing, one, you can learn anything, but you can literally create your like wealth. You can, like, you have the ability to create an insane amount of wealth, and you can retain that wealth yourself and be. It's really what it is to be an independent developer. And I think that there should be, instead of like thinking, let me train to code to like, play some like numbers game on getting some job that doesn't exist. It's like, and I know it takes a leap of faith, but learning to code, learning all these like data science, all these things, so you can empower yourself by being able to build something good for somebody, you will like go far beyond just a job. In fact, the job will be like, if you do get a job, that'll be like, oh well, my business didn't work out, so someone offered me a job. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's, you'll be better positioned if you fail at a business rather than,
No,
you know, yeah.
you're speaking truth. I actually just had a friend who he worked for a company that like about a year or two ago like did all these huge layoffs, and he actually wasn't part of the layoffs, but like in solidarity with the way that they laid some people off, he left the company because he was like, I don't like how you guys did that. And there's another reason, because he started a company and absorbed some of that workforce. The
Yeah.
people he was just working with, who just got laid off, and he knows exactly how they work.
100%.
He started a company, absorbed them. Now, the company did not work out for him the way that he wanted it to, but he's better for it, honestly. He employed people for a small period of time.
Yeah.
Was able to secure like a VC, which is that's a whole skill set in
Right,
itself. Talk
right.
about selling an idea, right?
Yeah.
Because you got to tell a VC like not only a general return on interest, but you got to give them like an exciting idea that they're going to believe for like years to come.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
That's
100%.
a big feat. He did that and turned that around really quick. But the way that he lost the company, or I wouldn't say he lost the company, the reason he stopped focusing on the company so much was he realized it was ultimately a dead end. So he pivoted very quickly, was able to find a company who liked what they were working on. They got acquired, so all those
Nice.
people kept their jobs. He got a little bit of like kind of a little bit of something. I don't know exactly how
Yeah.
details break down, but he's not walking away empty-handed. And before he could even apply for a job, he had legit recruiters, not like just
Yeah.
the random headhunters. Like legit recruiters came up to him and we were like, "Hey, we noticed you just sold your company. Like, would you want to come work for us? Because
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, you just built a company in like a year and a half and sold it at like a pretty good price.
Yeah.
You probably know what you're doing. Do you want to come and be a senior engineer over here? And we'll give you some autonomy. We'll give you some resources. Let's
That's
see
awesome.
what to do with it." So yeah, what you just said, I just personally witnessed in my life. I think
Yeah.
it's 100% true.
Yeah, like that, and that story, like, I can already tell if someone's hearing this, they're already like doing the like, oh, but like you have to be like rich and privileged to do that.
No, you don't.
You literally, I think I know what you're talking about, and I think they're not, right? Like they came from a very humble beginnings, right? Like I'm not trying
actually,
to.
they came from Michigan, just like
Yeah, okay, I think I know what you're talking. Yeah, like so like. That like, and it's not even that. Like you could say, oh well, they probably went to a good university. There's people that just always make excuses. Like the reality is, you can if you hold yourself accountable for everything, whether it's like the fact that you don't like your job or the fact that like you, instead of getting high after work and going to sleep, you should be spending 2 hours developing your business or something. If you actually hold yourself fully accountable, even for like thinking negatively about something, like I'll like stop myself and be like, man, I'm just like being negative about this, like
Exactly.
And if you fully hold yourself accountable, you will get to the end of like, oh, I don't care, I'm gonna start my own business. And like you will, like if everyone held themselves fully accountable, everyone would have that identity and like confidence of like, oh, it doesn't matter how much money I have, I'll just do it. So it's like you might as well just cut to the chase and like and try your best to like. And not everyone's an entrepreneur, but I mean, if that's something that interests a ton of engineers, like part of the reason I'm saying it is that there's so many software developers in just check Hacker News. Like I'd say 50% of people on Hacker News are engineers with an entrepreneurial spirit. And they'll never start their company because they think it's not for them, or they think that like, oh, I gotta like have an MBA or I gotta be extroverted or whatever. It's like no, you have to just hold yourself accountable for doing the things necessary to reach out to people, to find the problem, to like spend an hour like researching different things that like literally try to think about business ideas for an hour a day, whatever it is. If you just hold yourself accountable, like I think we're we can go many paths right now, but I think we're ripe for a rise in the independent engineer that builds great things and just sells it on his own, you know.
No, I agree. I mean, I think I liken it a lot to Tree. So I feel like, back throughout like the 70s and 80s, and a majority of the 90s, but we do see the shift that I'm talking about starts to happen late 90s, early 2000s. But real quick, it's like we had these gatekeepers and these record labels, and you basically had people that were like, starting a band, well, there's only one way to do it. You have to be 100%. You gotta like be willing to record for years, and you have to earn the good graces of the record label. And if you're lucky and they don't completely like take advantage of you, then you might like get like a couple world tours, and maybe 5 bands will make it throughout time. And in the 90s, they started making more of a mill house and like a factory. Like what we just ended in the VC tech world was what was going on in the 90s. In like
100%. That's such a good point.
Factory,
wow.
They could just take in talent, pump it out, and the top VCs
100%.
make all the money, right? And a lot of the music was like kind of pointless, really irrelevant, wasn't really addressing anything, wasn't even like a true expression. Like NSYNC, what is that? An expression? Backstreet Boys, what is that?
Yeah.
I mean, whatever, it's fine, it's entertainment, but like, what is it? And so like, but then you look at like the whole like app startup vibe that Silicon Valley, the show, did a great job making fun of and kind of depicting. It was like there was basically like a headless race to no end. Everyone was just like, I want to be the guy who did the next thing. And You're gonna solve world hunger. You're gonna solve transportation. You're gonna solve delivery. Boom, 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 boom. And then none of these companies really made that much money because they weren't actively solving it in the right ways, which is what we're realizing now.
100%.
Centralized technology is not going to solve daily problems. Decentralized, smaller groups of people solving problems in their local areas, like that is going to be the real.
And also, the unicorn fantasy is like there are unicorns, but there's a couple. We can go a whole unicorn debunking the unicorn thing, but long story short, unicorns are it's largely a crazy amount of positioning and an effort that leads them there. The unicorn is not something you engineer yourself to be. It's a result of you being the right person to be a unicorn. You can't control whether or not you're a unicorn, but what you can control is like being very valuable to people and building valuable things for people. And I think that the whole like that's such a good analogy with the music industry. Talent right now is really the engineers. Like that's the crux of it. It's so funny because and that's why I think like there really should be an awakening of engineers like building their own stuff and not caring and being able to communicate because at every startup I've ever worked at, the engineers are the ones that had a ton of power when it comes to the things that they say. They just don't know how to tap into it. And the sort of authorizers are often these VCs. They're like, like we'll give you this money. Like I kind of talked about this some other stream, but it's like whenever someone's giving you money to get to a location, that's I'm not saying don't ever take money, but that's a situation where you're making a sacrifice, and that sacrifice, in my opinion, is going to be your independence. And I think a lot of that, the VCs, similar to how these like Hollywood authorizers kind of like work, is they tap into talent. They try to own that they can't actually do themselves. Like the same way a lot of startup founders can't actually build the product. A lot of like Hollywood people, they can't sing, they can't dance, they don't know guitar, like so they tap into something they can't know. They sort of try. They insert themselves by saying, "Oh, you won't be able to hit these numbers without me," which is a assertion which you prove. But like without proving that, you're like, okay, well, I want money because I'm poor and I have anxiety, so I'll take the deal. But I think the reality is, if more people chose to keep their independence and to like make some sacrifices up front, rather than sacrificing your independence later on for comfort, sacrificing your comfort up front, living below your means, so you can start that business and be independent. And I think that's the glue to be like, okay, because you meet people like this all the time, but I think they're few and far between that are like, oh yeah, like I just like built this app and like I learned how to code, and it's someone that you would talk to and you're like, you know how to code, you don't even seem like an engineer, but they'll be like, oh, I learned how to code and I built this and I just like started a company and I have like a ton of clients and I'm making like 1 million plus a year, and they're like, wait, what? And this is just like, it's literally just a random person. There's people like this all around,
Oh yeah.
but people think they need VCs. We're crazy.
No, it's like you need a product.
Yeah,
Like, and
100%.
like once you have the product, then then I would say accept money for VC.
Oh yeah.
Scale your product, right?
Yeah, I'm not.
For scaling. Oh no, I don't think you're saying that.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to respond to saying VC
100%.
is great for scaling products. I think that's what the use case is for. And then the other thing that I just want to balance what you're saying, because I know what you really mean, but just for the sake of posterity, it's like value your independence, but not because you want to be selfish. You want to value your independence so you have full mobility to be helpful to somebody.
100%.
Right? It's like I like to think about
that's a good point.
The airplane analogy. Like you do have to put the oxygen mask on first. You have to make sure you are stable.
Yeah.
And the second you know you're stable, then you immediately start helping people. And that's what I think that's like your message, right? Like
really,
you
it
need
is
that independence so that you know you're actualizing your potential and not being hindered.
Yeah.
Because when you hit that potential, then you have maximum impact and you can help people. And that's why I said this too. It's like focus on the local community. Like what I'm interested in is like if I had enough time, which hopefully I will in the coming years, because what I've learned is, again, the more successful you are within companies and impact, like you're just given more resources, more time to develop, and that seems to be true, is one of the pet projects that I kind of want to engage in within like my local community, is I want to go to libraries and figure out can we make domain specific like LLMs for libraries where you know what I mean, and then like you go to that website, there could be like a website you go to or something, and you could interact with the LLM to get a sense of the library. Now this isn't to stop you from going to the library. This is hopefully a way to get people into the library and understand the type of books they have there. Why is no one doing that? That seems a cool project, and probably no one's doing it because where's the money? Libraries aren't like these huge data center infrastructure places, so who's paying for what, blah, blah, blah. But I promise you, if no one's done it in like 8 years, and I go do it with a small team of people, I bet you shortly after I do it, there's going to be a VC who's like, hey, let me help scale that. That's a good idea. Sometimes it just takes, like you said, and the live under your means. You don't have to spend like a king to live like a king. You know, like you just have to do the right things and work within that space. There's it's unfortunate, and all these things come with so many caveats too. You know, like there's so many things in society and so many people.
100%.
So many reasons to shoot down everything I just said. To be honest, go for it. Like if you want to do that, go for it. Like, I promise you, there are people who heard the same things and will now go and do something.
I hope.
So if you're gonna be, if you want to hate on someone, shoot them down. I say, sure, get out of the way. That's all you're doing. You're just getting out of the way so that the person you're hating can achieve something. And I'm
gonna say one more, like, because I know we're going on a lot, but it's a fun conversation. I think there's one thing that and what I've done this past year, which you probably know more than anyone, because I just like message a ton about everything I'm learning. That I think, especially like that post college or post like 25 time, I think everyone, especially if you already sort of have a skill or you want to push to the next level entrepreneurially, I think it's so vital to mix part of the comfort thing with your saying, make sacrifices for a year to be less comfortable and to be, but what you're sacrificing, you're gaining an ownership over your time. So, and that could be quitting a job, that could be doing something, I don't know what it is for women, but you lose comforts in order to gain some control of your time, and you can create an environment in which you can push to the next level in your career by going really hard on something. And it could be like if you're into cooking and you want to be a restaurateur and you're like 28 or whatever, and this is probably one of the last times that you're gonna have like super free and independent, you should. It's like, spend a year, just like contact some restaurateur and be like, I'll shadow you for free. like contact like 1,000 people in your city, be like, I'll shadow you for free. It's like, if you own your time a little bit more and you just like hone in, for me it was like honing in on machine learning, and like if you just hone in on something and you diversify your skill set and owning your time, the owning your time, you're going to get into a good mental space where you're not like in that 9 to 5 anxiety feedback loop. You're gonna be in, not that everyone has that, but I'm saying it's like 90% of people have that feedback loop, and well, I'm guessing, but like that's why like there's drinking culture on the weekends. It's a anxiety release, so it's like.
But it's also camaraderie too. I think
True,
the,
true,
the
true.
drinking culture is like an interesting mixture of pros and cons for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But I hear what you're saying.
I'm making generalizations here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but like if you sort of like own your time a little bit, you can sort of like have because a part of why people always think, oh, this is brain elasticity. That's why I can't learn things anymore